Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Well, it just feels like yesterday that I was here talking about 21 grams. But yes, I am here, and I'm super excited to be here because I have one of my favorite human beings on this planet joining me, and we're going to talk. We're going to really delve into Howard Marsh because I've been waiting for this for a while. So Bob McGough, everybody, is here. Hello, Bob.
Man, I'm super excited to be here.
So as I do with this show to start off, I would love to afford you the opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about yourself. I mean, those who are under a rock who don't know you. But tell everybody a little bit about you and what you do.
I'm a author, podcaster, and indie TTRPG game designer from the backwoods of Alabama. And most folks know me because I write a series of books about a redneck wizard with a crippling meth addiction, Howard Marsh. And I just kind of dabble in a little bit of everything. So no telling where people find me.
Yeah, we'll get into your exploration of yourself a little bit here, but I have to ask right off the bat, when did that magical moment happen that you came up with the catchphrase about the magical wizard with the crippling meth addiction? Because it is the perfect way to describe Howard in a way that I've never heard a character be perfectly encompassed without ever knowing them, right? I happen to know Howard, and reading the books, but before that, hearing that, it is probably the most enticing way to get somebody to do that. How long did you work on that, or did that come naturally? What happened? How did that for catchphrase come about for you?
It came about organically, but it did take time. It was doing a number of events. It was probably, when you're first starting doing events, you don't know what the hell you're doing. And I was lucky to get to, well, my first few, I didn't know anybody at all. I got my very first event, a incredibly nice elderly couple who had been doing conventions for decades kind of took me under their wing and told me that, oh, this con is not normal. Normally you would have made a sale by now. It was a terrible con. So my first few events, I didn't know what I was doing. But I was kind of generally aware of the idea of an elevator pitch. But it was probably because in my early events that I did, the first few years of doing events, the Marsh books none of the Jubal County books were out. I was mostly going and either promoting whatever podcast I was doing at the time, or I was selling anthologies I was in. And so those were also scattered that I never really had a need to come up with a catchy line. Like, oh, these are anthologies that I'm in. What do you like to read? So, but with this, and it's currently a struggle I'm undergoing with my new book. And it's basically, I just kept pitching it to people and seeing kind of what worked and what didn't. And it just over time organically kind of slimmed itself down into one sentence. And it works. It works. So now with the new book, we've started the process over. I have no idea how to market the new book. So we're starting, and every time I pitch it to someone, I see what they react to, what they bounce off of, and we kind of slowly narrowing it down over time.
Yeah, and that's fascinating that you're taking that journey as well. Howard is an interesting cat all to himself too, which is, you know, I think I think even your catchphrase undersells it a little bit because Howard, very much like Johnny Lincoln, has a juxtaposition to get in his own way more often than not. I would say that Howard is a lot smarter than he would even give himself credit for, but I think he does think a little bit more of himself than Johnny does. But it's interesting to me that you have a character like that who kind of undersells the value of the joke you're telling, which is, he's got a crippling meth addiction. He's really, because he gets in such unbelievable situations all the time. you know? Do you ever get exhausted by Howard's juxtaposition?
Uh not not really, because I just Howard is very much no, I mean, obviously I don't know any wizards, but um I
At
have
least you don't know that you know any wizards.
yeah, yeah. But I've basically known Howard Marsh in multiple iterations over the course of my life, and have been kin to some iterations of it. So, yeah, I don't necessarily really get tired of it.
Hmm.
Where I do get tired of it is that the series was not intended to be as long as it's turning out to be. Um, uh, the stories just kind of took on a life of their own, and kind of it goes sideways on occasion.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready for him to get his act together and kind of like I know what's coming, and I'm ready to get to that point where it's like, okay, yeah, like he's getting a
So there,
little bit better, but
there is an end game with Howard then.
there is
That's
there
interesting because
yeah.
you would never suspect that reading these stories.
Oh god. Well, that's actually the the reason I wrote these books is because, like I said, I've known a lot of Howard Marshes in my life,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, I had a good friend that brilliant artist, but a crack addict, and it's just one of those deals. Like he's called me before ODing, um, and there's a lot of these people that they don't get a happy ending. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate, just the nature of addiction. And so
Yeah.
from book one, I've set out that it's it's going to take a long time, and he's still going to be a redneck at the end of it, but he is going to piece his life
Finding
back together,
innocent
kick his
man.
addiction. So it's just
Yeah.
everything takes a little longer in the South.
It is weird. I had a friend who I considered one of the smartest human beings I've ever met, and he made some dumb choices, and he didn't survive those choices, and
Mhm.
it's very interesting to me that's the case. I mean, I just it baffles the mind.
Mm.
It's one of those mysteries of life, right? I mean, with Howard, there's so much just mischief and chaos that it just becomes amusing and entertaining.
Yeah.
I'm sure for Howard, it over time, especially getting beat up all the time, it doesn't get that amusing. But
Yeah.
for us, the audience, it's pretty amusing.
Yeah, no, 100%. But it's one of that, I think just knowing the people that I know, the cliche of the tortured artist,
Hmm.
and here in the South, a lot of the people that I know, they're young guys that they had no interest in football, they had no interest in hunting. They liked doing art or playing music or something like that, or not the tradition. They weren't trying to play country.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so you take that kind of predisposition to angst, I guess, and then you put it in a situation where you are other because you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Doing what you love makes you an outsider. And it's really no wonder that a lot of these people uh end up turning to drugs over time. And then then our legal system gets a hold of them and just compounds the stress, which makes it that much less likely that they're ever going to kick their addictions. So,
And you don't know how the people around you are going to respond either. There's some enabling going on, then there's some distancing and all those things, and that plays a factor in how that person kind of spirals or doesn't spiral as well, right? So
100%.
yeah. I failed to mention that there's people here. Anita's here, Tiffany's here, Madeline's here, and then Tiffany says addiction can happen to anyone. That is very true. And slow and steady, he is taking his time. Okay, we'll chalk it. We'll chalk it up to that. The other interesting thing that is parallel to the conversation I was having previously with Wayne that we're talking about that I really love. This is to me the Jubal County saga is kind of a throwback to memories of kind of Kurt Vonnegut and storytellers like that who like to do a bunch of different stories that kind of have tiny bit sewn seeds together that kind of weave into one interesting tale. You've taken that approach with virtually every single one of these novellas, novels, and put that together. And so you're not just telling one story and moving on to the next story. You're usually telling 3 to 4 stories within the context of one story and then moving on to the next story. And I'm kind of curious about that exercise for you and why you decided to go that route. Was it just because these stories had at just a short telling that you wanted to put them all together, or did you feel like there was kind of this interesting thing that you were finding where you could weave them all together like that?
So it's two things. One, the best episodes of the X-Files were the Monster of the Week episodes. Take all that big storyline stuff and just chuck it away. I like the Monster of the Week stuff. In any show like that, Buffy, the ones where I love Monster of the Week episodes. I very rarely enjoy when they make the shift from Monster of the Week to, well, no, here's the big plot. Supernatural, all these shows. Like I love and partly that's just because I don't ingest a lot of TV shows. I never really have watched a lot of movies, but TV shows have never really been my thing. And so much of what I do watch is because someone else is watching it. So something where I can come in and sit down in the living room with the lady wife and watch. She's currently re-binging Stargate for the Lord knows how manyth time. And but so much of that I can just pop in, watch an episode or two, and then pop out. And when, next weekend, when I find another hour or two to sit with her and watch this, I'm not really missed anything.
You're not lost.
Yeah. And I really enjoy that. So that when it comes to serial media, Monster of the Week is kind of my favorite. But then it was, so I started as a horror author, and the Marsh stuff is while it's definitely not horror, I would call it like horror adjacent. It's a little darker urban fantasy than a lot. It's got the occasional what I would consider traditional horror scene in it, but they're not horror novels. And I've always felt that horror works best in shorter form. Stephen King's best stuff are his short stories and novellas by far. Shawshank Redemption, novella. And so
Clive Barker, Books of Blood.
Exactly. So because I think it's incredibly hard to maintain suspense over the long form, and for horror you kind of really need that suspense. And so I've always been just a big fan of, I'm going to write it, it's going to be as long as it needs to be and not really try and draw it out. But the first attempt at writing Bringing Home the Rain, it wasn't going to be 2 novellas. It was one novel with the 2 storylines intertwining. And I eventually just got to the point where I was like, it's not adding anything by having 2 intertwining at the same time. I'd rather just
Hmm.
tell it one story, um, and it's easy for me to keep to keep straight. And if it's easier on me, it's more likely to actually get out in the world. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what ended up leading me down that way. And the other thing is like the Howard Marsh is not the guy you call in for world-ending catastrophes. Like
You
he's
hope
the
not.
guy. Yeah, right. Oh, if he's getting called in, things have gone horribly awry.
Yeah.
But he's a small town guy who gets called in
Yeah.
for small town mysteries, and those don't need 90,000 words.
Right. And they also, yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Anita says that Stargate is very repingeable, and
Oh,
I want to
my
put this
wife will
comment
kick
up.
Chad.
Yeah, I'm going to put this comment up by Tiffany. I said a lot of people stuff magic for mental health reason, and then they go from one end to yes, that's very true. Absolutely.
100%.
But the other thing about it too, from that perspective, what you were saying about putting the stories out there and just having him solve mystery after mystery and aspect of it. But the funny thing about it is that there's relatable content from each story that goes into maybe not the next story, but the next story later on. And you
Mhm.
you do reference other books into other books. So is there a part of you doing it this way, having a little fun with like the Easter egging and the idea of that? Is that something that you kind of relish in, that you enjoy when you're writing these stories?
I do. I do, and a lot of these things, I'm very much I'm like 10% plotter, 90% pantser, and
Hmm.
so in book, oh god, um, I think it's novella 3. Um, Not providing spoilers, but you encounter essentially what's a cat. It's a catfish god. Um, until I sat down that day to write that scene, there was no catfish god. That was not a blip on the horizon. But it made sense as it came up. And so but that is something that the moment I had that, I was like, that is going to be coming back. And
Hmm.
there are little hints that this catfish god is letting himself be known to Mars, like, I'm watching you. And it's
Yeah.
something that if you have if you've read that novella, you can pick up on, oh, I see what's going on there. But it's so subtle that if you haven't read that one, you can read this and you'll be fine.
Hmm.
You're not like, oh my god, the book is ruined. It's an added layer that kind of rewards the folks that read it in its entirety in
Yeah.
order. But I also I Wayne talked about a little bit, like, I'm kind of seriesed out too. Um, I have a lot of books I want to read, and
Yeah.
being locked in on reading, you know, 8 books,
Yeah.
I don't have the time for that. But Wayne actually had me read his most recent, and it was one that I could, like, I hadn't read books 1 and 2, but I could come in. Okay, I don't have to have read books 1 and 2. I can read this, and I really enjoy
Yeah.
it. Um, and so I do like the idea that people can pretty much pick up any of these books and just start there if you wanted. You'll get a
Yeah.
richer understanding, but it is not required that you have to start at one and work through. So
Yeah, I started at 5, so and then I went back and read 1 through 4 after that because 5 is so brilliant. It was one of my favorite books of the year. The one thing that always struck me too that's interesting and going back, which is a fun thing to do too, I think in a lot of ways, which you make that very accessible as well. Uh, but the idea of there's a reoccurring theme with Marsh that I think is underlying, but is very prominent in a lot of the magical people he meets because they all have this misconception about him, is his family history and his family tree, and putting little sprinkles of that in there. Was your intention to kind of sprinkle it along that way and kind of, I mean, his grandmother gets involved a couple times in some
yeah.
sticky ways that are just interesting, right? So
So again, it's not a huge spoiler to anyone who's read any of the books, but the two villains of the piece are Howard Marsh himself, because he's constantly getting his own way, and Granny.
Yeah.
Granny is the big bad of the piece, but
Yeah.
it's book 6 is actually uh the she's the first time that she plays an actual significant role in a scene. But
Mm.
I start with, in book 1, you just like Marsh goes by her house, and like I think he maybe sees like some movement in the window or something
Yeah.
like that. And then like every book I try and add a little bit more. And that is, in reviews, that's the number one thing that people say is like, I want, like, when do I get to see Granny? And it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
book 6. Well, I think book 5 she shows up in the epilogue. Um, and
Yeah,
so like,
she's become the Vera of the series.
yeah,
For people who are Cheers fans, they'll get
yeah,
that reference. But
no, so she is, but I have really enjoyed that. I really like
yeah,
dropping
I do
these
too.
hints, and for me it's fun. And so then but she will, the kind of the big picture is this first 6 book arc is very much just kind of finding a little glimmer of hope in his life. Then the
Mhm.
next arc is going to be more about like found family, that kind of. But the final arc will be much more about resolving his issues with his grandmother. um, that will be a heavy theme of that. So just know more Granny content is coming.
It's fascinating too is the way you describe this series, and knowing you and your and how jubilant you are, and how amazing you are as a person. It is very interesting to me how intellectually layered a series like this can be, because there is another level of Easter egging that goes on in this as well, that is not prominently displayed, but it is oftentimes very interesting, and that is using the setting, uh, to enhance the mystery and the mischief that Howard Marsh gets into. Oftentimes, I mean, the great example I use is the Alabama high school football circuit that you
Yeah,
constantly reference. That is very that becomes prominently. He has to work around to get, to get
yeah.
to get to solve a couple cases in that, and so talk a little bit about incorporating your home into that, and making it subtle. Was that also intentional? Was that something you just wanted something? Was that for the people of Alabama, or was that kind of your way to introduce people to Alabama without like throwing it in their face?
It was kind of twofold. One is I was always kind of told, like, write the books that you want to read.
Yeah.
And I had never read a book that really felt like it represented my area. I mean, there are some great books that take place in rural settings, and there are some great
Mm,
books that take place in Alabama. Um, but a lot of those, are like more Birmingham, or more
yeah.
North Alabama, or maybe it's
Yeah.
down in Mobile.
Yeah.
Central Alabama doesn't get a ton of love. I mean, deservedly so. But uh, so part of it was that I wanted write what you know. It's like it made it easy for me. It made it easy for me to visualize. Jubal County is basically, I grew up in Crenshaw County. Jubal County is Crenshaw County that I just filed the serial numbers off and changed the name of all the towns. Um,
To protect
eh,
the innocent.
well, partly, yeah, but it's partly it makes it easy for me, because then I can be like, oh, I need him to go to Sumpville. Well, Sumpville
Mhm.
is the equivalent of Luverne, so I don't have to sit there and think about like, oh, well, what
Yeah.
would Sumpville have? Where would the high school be located? Because I know
Yeah.
roughly where it is. I bagged groceries in Luverne, Alabama, many a summer. And so it makes it easy for me. But by then changing it, like Elk Grove is the equivalent of Highland Home, Alabama.
Mhm.
Uh, Elk Grove has a Dairy Queen and a Piggly Wiggly. Um, Highland Home aspires to have enough people to justify a Dairy Queen and a Piggly Wiggly. We have it has I think a Dollar Tree, and it's got a Subway and a gas station. Um, that's it. uh, so being able to drop in stuff that I want,
Yeah.
that I need for the scene is nice. But then part of part of what I try to do is Alabama has a ton of warts, but it really is a staggeringly beautiful state.
Mhm.
And I really like the juxtaposition of like I love just like riding back roads and you like look and it's like that is just an absolutely gorgeous like cattle pasture flowing up into woods, and it's just
Yeah.
like looks like something out of Ireland or New Zealand. Like it's so gorgeous. You're like, wow, that's amazing. And then like a mile up the road is like an abandoned mobile home that's collapsed in on itself, and I love that juxtaposition of like
Yeah, yeah.
showing it's a beautiful place. um just the people just mess it up. It'd be great if it wasn't for all the people. um so I like playing around with that kind of
Nice.
showing that it's a beautiful place with just a couple warts. So
So let's 360 a little bit and talk about Southern Saudade, because this is quite a different departure for you, and an interesting one. And I know there's a practical reason for why you went this direction, and you can talk a little bit about that because I know you, so I know the story. But
yeah.
but also it's a very interesting exercise, and I'm curious. Did you have trouble early on, because you've been writing Howard Marsh for what, 4 years now, 3 years, and really just diving deep into that aspect of that pool was changing the mindset for you a little bit more of an exercise than you thought it would be in terms of writing something like this, or was it nice to turn off that part of you and work on something different?
So it wasn't that much of a departure because so many of these stories, um, most of these stories actually I wrote at least the first draft of them before I wrote the Marsh novels.
Gotcha.
Um, the exception would be the longest, the novelette that's in there, um, is arguably the most Jubal County story of them all in there, but it takes place in the
Yeah.
80s.
Hmm.
And so Marsh is probably like 2 or 3 when that story happens. So uh um so it wasn't quite as much of a real, departure because I had already written most of them,
Hmm.
and the one that I wrote most recently really was a
In that
big
same
Jubal
vein.
County story. Yeah. Now, but thematically, it's pretty different. It's
Yeah.
angsty 17-year-old Bob written into onto the page. So,
Bob's goth period, everybody.
oh god, oh man, I was 1,000,000% that goth kid in high school. But this is the main character there because it's in the 80s. um he gets introduced to the wonders of Black Sabbath, so
Yeah,
it kind of he was a big Jethro Tull fan
mm,
who got introduced to Sabbath, and kind of if he had been in the late 90s, he 100% would have been the cringy goth kid that I was. Oof, oof. But
but
yeah,
talk
no,
about the
it's
practical reason for it, because you're in a position right now that's very interesting as an author who is out there a lot. You're out there making it, and it's by design. You have a strategic plan going, and this is part of that strategic plan. So talk a little bit about that, and because I
yeah.
think people would be interested to know, you're headed toward a point when you're about to have to make a decision on what you're going to do as a person, whether you're going to continue doing this on the side or this becomes your livelihood, right?
Yeah.
So,
So the dream has always been for this to be my livelihood.
mhm.
And early on, I was writing short stories, and then I quickly realized, oh wait, you cannot make any money writing short stories. So
At
that's
least
when I
not enough
started.
to eat.
Oh God, no. I don't think anyone's been able to do that since the early
Yeah,
days of Weird Tales.
I think you'd be surprised. There's a couple out there, but yeah, not many.
It's I would love to be that because I love writing short stories far more than I like writing longer pieces. But and so I pretty quickly realized that if I was going to make a serious go of this, I had to write longer stuff. And I was fortunate to get mentored by a guy named John Hartness and kind of got some advice. And that's when I really took the plunge into, all right, we're going to get these Marsh novels out there.
Mhm.
And as I've gotten out and I've been doing the damn thing, um, where I have found that I've had typically the most success consistently with sales is when I share space with other authors who write stuff different from me. Um,
Mhm.
Me and Ben Meeks do a ton of events together, but Ben Meeks also writes male fronted, somewhat gritty, rural urban fantasy.
Mhm.
So if someone comes up, if that is not what draws them, they're not going to hang around. They're going to move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But and no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
But where when me and Ben can go and share a table with this person writes dystopian sci-fi, this person writes
Mhm.
high fantasy, having that variety there is really beneficial. Sales, a rising tide lifts all boats. Like my
Yeah.
sales are better than they should be because of that. Well, because I started as a horror writer, and the way Wayne was talking about having ADD on writing, that was
Mhm.
until the Marsh stuff, until I got serious about that. That was me. Every 6 months or so, I would change genres completely. I would write horror for a while, then I would write steampunk, then I would write fantasy, and I had to change it up just to keep me motivated.
Mhm.
So I have a ton of stuff in the chest that is in other genres, and there's genres that I mean they're all genre fiction. It's not like I've got the biography of Winston Churchill I've been sitting on. So it's all stuff that if you like nerdy genre fiction, odds are you'll probably like at least some element of this. So I got the Marsh books to a good stopping point, and
Yeah.
I'm now okay. Let's get some of this other stuff out. And Southern Saudade was the first because it was different but similar. So I felt like it was
Mhm.
kind of a good first dip in my toes into publishing stuff outside of urban fantasy.
Mhm.
It's not really urban fantasy, but it kind of is, but not
Mhm.
really. Uh, it's impossible to market. So, but and I'm going to, a horror collection is going to come next, and then a
Mhm.
steampunk collection. So that's kind of my strategy is I want to be the kind of you can come up to me. I don't have to be there with four different authors of four different types. I can be that
The 4 different
that per,
authors.
that the four different authors. So
Yeah. Nice.
we'll see how it pays off. Um,
Tiffany says she loves mixing it up with her books too, which she
yeah,
does very well. But
yeah, no, we talked very briefly about that at
Mhm.
Multiverse, and I
Yeah.
meant to talk to her more about that because it's the direction I'm heading. So, and not a lot of people do that, especially not under the same name, and that's
Mhm.
I have too much ego to change. I have too much ego to go to different pen names, and I don't have the bandwidth to run multiple social medias, so it's all going under Bob.
Which, this day and age, that is not as criminal as it maybe was once upon a time, which I think that was underplayed too. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of like, just a lot of empty gesturing about that. And I think, I think if you have an event like a multiverse where there is several different speculative fiction categories represented, diversifying your portfolio is a smart move to begin with, because you're going to have every opportunity that you wouldn't have had if horror people walk by your table and you don't have any horror, right?
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense. And Tiffany says me either. So, um but but did you? I mean, obviously, Southern Saudade, like you said, it just made the most sense because it was the closest thing to Martian. It's not that big of a departure. But did you think a little bit about, you know? is this going to alienate my audience a little bit? Did you not worried about that as well? And how did you decide? Did you work out the strategy to go, okay, I'm gonna do Southern Side, then I'm gonna do my horror, then I'm gonna do my steampunk, or was that just what you could get done first, and you're gonna just put that out there?
So I felt a little like I think that Southern Saudade is the best thing I've written to date.
Nice.
And may well be the best thing I ever write, to be honest, because like I don't know, just I put I put a lot more of myself in these stories than anything else I've written, and I really I put a lot more effort into them than I normally would. Um, and so I was less worried about it because it is so adjacent to. I mean, there's actually one flash fiction in there that is Howard Marsh encountering a critter, essentially. So it, like there's stuff in there. So I wasn't super worried about alienating a lot of my readers because I just know that the ones that this doesn't really appeal to probably would just skip it anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
So that one was not as much of a worry. I will admit I am slightly more worried about the others. I'm not really worried about necessarily alienating people. I do but I do have the worry that people are going to be like, okay, fine, but we want more Marsh,
yeah.
like that's why we're here. You got us here because of this. Now you're putting out this other stuff. And sure, fine. Like the horror collection I'm going to come out with is Southern horror. Actually the first ever Jubal County stories before I even knew Jubal County was a thing, they were horror short stories.
Mm,
So even my horror collection is going to have a lot of Jubal County in it. But then we're going to get
yeah.
to the steampunk, and that's going to be there ain't no Jubal County in this fantasy steampunk world I've created. So that's going to be a real shock.
Ugh.
So, and people may bounce off at heart, but I really like steampunk, and I want to get invited to go to steampunk conventions. So I really want to be like, oh, I wrote a steampunk book. Please let me be at your convention.
I am curious, writing in different genres, if you feel like, you know, if you had done that before you had done Marsh, it would be a different thing now because you've written so many words, right? And you're a different writer as of right now. So, do you feel like the maturity level of your writing lends itself to being breaking out a lot easier for you than it would have if you had started this way?
I will say, by the time the Marsh stuff was coming out in earnest, I'd probably written close to 1,000,000 words by that point.
Yeah,
Um, and I'm really glad it worked out that way.
yeah,
Because I'm a mu- I'm a much better writer now than I was when I started. Um, and so and that's honestly like been the biggest thing holding me back on going back and digging some of this stuff out is because I just
hmm,
know it's gonna be so much. I I just hate rewriting. I hate rewriting more than anything on this planet. And so I know there's gonna be so much of it that I have to do that I have to
even
go.
more than Tennessee football.
It's the only thing I hate more than Tennessee football. It really is. Look, there's a story in Southern Saudade that I had written like 4,000 words of it. Uh, Somehow that file got lost. The only file I could
Oh,
find had like 2,500 words in it, and the only difference was 1,500 words. That I knew what happened, and I just said, "To hell with it! I'm never going to write this." And
yeah.
then, cut pan, like 4 years later, I stumbled upon on a Google Drive the full 4,000 words, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. Now I'll actually write it. That's how bad I hate rewriting. Um, and God, anyway, so I've been dreading that. But it's got to happen, because
Yeah.
I've learned so much just going to cons and hearing other people talk and learning from other much better authors than me. There's so much that I didn't know that I was doing wrong back then that now I can see. It's like, oh, that's not great. Need to fix that. But it's going to take a lot of work. So, and I'm at my core, I'm a lazy guy, so I'm trying to avoid it.
The magical elements of these and the magic systems that you use, and especially in Marsh, and forgive me because I haven't read Sawdad yet, but uh, the idea of that, and is that where you get the most whimsical? Is that where you feel like you are the most fictional? Because I would imagine that for you, knowing that this is the county you know so well and the things you know so well, that one, you can reference those without even probably even doing research. But two, I think I don't know if this is how you feel, but maybe there's a certain responsibility you feel to representing that as opposed to the magical systems, which you can just basically make up and do that. So do you feel that's where you're at your most whimsical, is when you're talking about the magical elements of it?
I will say that there's a conscious decision with the magic of Jubal County to leave it pretty vague. Um,
Hmm.
no, not really going in and spelling out all the rules. Because I kind of like the mystery of it, leaving it a little bit more mysterious.
Hmm.
And so, and also, if I have rules, then I can't break them. Um, so I like being able to, if I really need something to happen, that doesn't, it's not, some, oh my God, he just totally did a J.K. Rowling and just for this one book brought him the one perfect thing, you know. Um,
Yeah.
trying to avoid that kind of stuff. But I do like having the freedom of, I haven't spelled it out precisely, so I can kind of play with it, and I do enjoy that. But where I get the probably the and this will be, I know this will be the thing that, of all the stuff I've written, that's the farthest out from ever seeing the light of day, is I have a world that I've created that is essentially a water world. It's technically it's Earth after like Cthulhu rose, kind of sort of. Imagine that he rose in like the time of the Crusades, and so all this
Okay.
up to these few scattered islands, and now it's kind of weirdly fantasy based, and um, there's a bunch of sharks. Because I love sharks, and so I've really been like I get pretty whimsical there. Like a lot of the stories, for
Hmm.
it to be such a grim sounding kind of setting, the stories get real silly. Like these the crews of these ships get into real like haphazard slapdash slapstick comedy kind of
Mm.
adventures, and like that's kind of my setting where I go to be just like, we're just gonna like, people may never see this stuff, let's just get silly with it, let's come up with some dumb shark that's doing some dumb thing, and these guys gotta resolve it. So
Mm.
that and I think what you're talking about, like, I do kind of feel a little bit of a responsibility to,
Mm.
and it's less about showing respect to the county that I'm from, because it's Crenshaw County. But more that, like, the biggest thing that I've struggled with writing Marsh is towing the line of being res- not playing addiction for laughs,
Yeah.
basically, and
Yeah.
most of the time when he actually uses it, happens off camera, and
Yeah.
I typically don't play. He'll, he might get lost or something like that, but typically if he's doing something dumb, it's probably because he was drunk, not
Yeah.
because he was high. So like just that kind of towing that line.
Hmm.
So I actually kind of dial back the whimsy almost on that,
Mm.
just because I'm trying to not turn addiction into a joke.
Yeah.
So
Bobby Nash joins us, and he says, "I rather enjoy
hey,
writing multiple genres. It works for me. Writing means juggling." Mm.
speaking of mentors of mine,
Yeah, there you go. Probably one of the greatest guys you could learn from selling about. I mean,
no doubt.
if him and Hartness were on opposite ends of a table setting, you do not want to be in the middle of that.
Or you do, you just want to listen, you just want to sit
Yeah,
there
yeah, right.
and sometimes just be like, oh God, let me bask, so yeah, no, 100%.
It's probably why I don't know if they've ever done it. I mean, they've been in so many conventions together. I don't know if that's ever happened. but I would assume there's a purpose why Bobby's on one side and John's on the other side.
Yeah. No, I've seen them at so many cons, but another thing about it, I've never seen them on a panel together. Are
Oh
they the
yeah,
same?
that would
Are
be.
they the same person? Are they? Is this a Clark Kent Superman situation? I don't know. I'm not saying, but
Yeah,
could
it's
be.
interesting. I've actually never seen them together either, so that's interesting.
They were at Multiverse at the same time,
But
but
not.
I did not see them together at
Oh
the same
man.
time. So
Yeah, John rarely leaves his table at
yeah,
Multiverse. So
yeah, yeah.
which one is Superman? Tiffany says. That is a great
Ooh.
question. That's the mystery of life
Mm,
right there.
yeah. I'm going to give the nod to Bobby simply because he
Yeah,
actually writes comics. So if
yeah,
anyone's going to be Superman in that, it's got to be the guy who writes comics. So
yeah. Plus John has a thing for cats, which is kind of a villainous kind of idea. So
he's the Lex Luthor to Bobby
yeah.
Superman.
He says we've done panels together. It's fun, but material and any matter,
Oh yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah, uh, yeah. Pour the rest of the panel.
Oh yeah,
I mean, I mean, I would love to be on a panel with the both of them just to sit there and to soak it all up. I mean, that's fantastic. But
yeah. It's kind of like watching John and like Kevin J. Anderson and a few of these other people just get on a panel. Like it's like you don't even really need a moderator. You can just kind of
yeah, yeah,
turn them
yeah,
loose.
yeah, very much so. You know the the fascinating thing too about the whimsical nature of how you write too is humor something that you really, I mean, it's in a lot of cases it's self-deprecating because you're not writing this in first person typically, but you are kind of giving us from Howard's perspective a lot, and it's like, do you feel like that whimsy helps cut that idea of making fun of something too, because the whimsical aspect of it is more of his innate ability to be dumb
Yeah,
sometimes, to put
yeah.
it lightly.
He's the smartest idiot you know. Yeah, no. Um, ooh, yeah. Uh, man, I had a thought and then I lost it.
Uh-huh.
Um, I lost it.
That's okay.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Sure, yeah. I mean, writing in the whimsical nature that you write in, writing it with that kind of idea, does it
Oh,
cut, you know?
self-deprecating humor.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. I'm a millennial. I'm on the the upper cusp of millennial. But that's our defining trait is self-deprecating humor and wishing we were dead. Um,
Yeah.
and so whenever I write anything at all autobiographical, unless I'm talking about something serious like depression or something like
Mhm.
that, like I self-deprecating humor is my voice.
Mhm.
Um, when I'm on panels, I tend to be very self-deprecating. People I don't know, I tend to be very self-deprecating around. Um, that's just kind of that is that is my public-facing voice, I guess you could say. Um, and so Marsh, there's not a lot of me in Marsh, but there are
Mhm.
like little hints of it. And so
Mhm.
the fact that he's always reading, like it's not anything that's ever really played up, but Marsh is a big reader. Most of what he steals from the Christian Mission are books.
Yeah.
And so he loves to read, he loves to feed, genre fiction like me. But yeah, like being self-deprecating like that is very much like that is me kind of shining through on that. And
Mhm.
um I think all good self-deprecating humor is somewhat whimsical at its heart.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that rings true for me. So
Yeah, there's a particular moment in Poison that I really love, and it's the moment in which all he has to do is shut the hell up, and he wouldn't get beat up, but he can't help himself, and he just has to say something, and that causes the guy to punch him, and then it becomes he's just about to get his ass kicked, and
yeah,
it's just like, and it's very interesting to me that there is a there's not a whatchamacallit, there's not a self-defense mechanism inside his own brain to stop him from being, self-deprecating often.
Yeah, no, he is the true antagonist of the piece. He's the protagonist and antagonist at the same time. 100% his own worst enemy.
Yeah.
But it's one of those, like, it's because I know those people. We all know
Yeah.
that person. We all know that
Yeah.
person that, like, dude, just shut up.
Yeah.
Just shut up.
Stop
Just
digging the hole.
Yeah, just stop talking. It'll be okay. And they can't help themselves.
Yeah.
And oof. Well, and it works out for them usually about as good as it works out for Marsh. So
Bobby says that humor can be tough to write. Bob does it extremely well. So does Hardness. So,
thank you. High praise. High praise.
So you're venturing into Saudade. You're closing out Marsh. So I want to ask you the same question that I asked Wayne. In fact, I'm going to ask you the next 10 questions are going to be the same exact questions I asked Wayne.
Yeah.
But I am curious, what has Howard Marsh given you that you didn't expect him to give you, that you're taking with you on this journey and finishing this off with?
I guess writing is such a lonely task, and imposter syndrome is so real. And I'd always struggled with, I'd had stories accepted into anthologies, so it's one thing. Okay, someone thought it was good enough to put in this anthology, but here's an interesting thing. The best stories in an anthology are always the ones at the beginning and the ones at the end. The editors typically put the best at the beginning and end, and my stories are always very in the middle. And so I never had any sort of validation in my writing. Like getting the lady wife to read it. Oh, this is good. She's somewhat biased.
Yeah.
And so, like, what Marsh gave me was the first time that a stranger on the internet, unprompted, was like, "Hey, I really like this," and and for maybe that says more about them than it does about me. But no. So, like, just I will, no matter what heights or lows my writing career goes, I think I'm always going to Marsh will always hold a special place in my heart, because that's a series that I became an author in my own head for.
Nice.
Like during.
Well, I mean, it's just brilliant. I mean, the layers to this, and I know it's weird to say that, a detective, Southern, redneck with a crippling meth addiction, that uses magic, could be so have depth, but it really does. It's very interesting, and I just think it's amazing. All right, so we're gonna do the questionnaire, developed by the great Bernard Pivot, and then perfected, of course, by James Lipton of Inside the Actor Studio, and adapted here for the purpose of this show. So, Bob, what is your favorite word to write?
So this is I don't know that I've ever actually written this combination in something that got published, but I'm a huge Donnie Darko fan, and I've always liked typing cellar door. Like, every time I type it, I think about Donnie Darko. It's like, this is the most beautiful combination of words. So I just it makes me happy for it to be such a depressing movie.
And then, what is your least favorite word to write?
I'm going to go with lieutenant, because I have
you can't spell it, or
I have never once spelled it correctly on the first try. Not once. Not once in my life have I spelled it correctly on the first try. I hate that word.
It's funny. I was having that moment today, so I can relate.
Yeah, no, and there's a number of words, like soldier. I like soldier 90% of the time I misspell it. Sergeant, a good 80 to 90%. It's something about military words. I just cannot spell them. And I have 2 novels sitting in the chest that are military fantasy. And
Yeah.
you think the word sergeant pops up once or twice, maybe? God, it was and soldier. Like you think after like 2 books worth, I would have learned how to spell it, but you would be wrong. So fuck those words.
All right. So what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Um uh just like folks being helpful like for no reason, like um so much of being an indie author surrounded by a bunch of other indie authors is how helpful everyone is. Everyone's
Mm,
always like, oh, did you hear about this opportunity? Like
mm,
uh i I can just it could be such a cesspool. I could see where it could easily turn into such a cesspool of people just like,
mhm,
no, no, I'm not going to share knowledge. No, I'm going to keep these opportunities for myself. And it's just not like that. And like that has been because again, writing is such a lonely thing. Um, Once I got out of my cave in Alabama and started going to events and meeting people like that, that's when I really started to flourish as a creative, being surrounded by people that were helpful. So,
nice. What turns you off?
ooh, uh, the inverse of that, people who there's probably a million different ways to say it, but how we've always said it here in the deep south is someone who big boys me. Um,
Yeah.
I cannot stand someone to act like they're better than the space that they're in. Um,
Mm,
I do not begrudge, if Jim Butcher wants to come to a con and he wants to be aloof or whatnot, um, and he wants to keep that separation, that's fine. Um, but if I'm dealing with some other indie author and or small time trad published author and they just act like they are better than the con that they are at, like, oh, I'm just here, the con is
mhm,
lucky to have me. No, that
yeah.
you're dead to me. You are dead to me. Luckily, that's never happened to me in the convention circuit. It's only ever happened to me in the music industry.
Right.
I've been big boyed numerous times in the music scene. Fuck them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's happened to me a lot in Hollywood.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, I bet. Oh, I bet. Ugh.
Uh, okay. So what is your favorite curse word?
Oh, fuck. Easy. Easy, easy, easy. That was that's why the back of the first Marsh novel in the blurb it specifically says that there's cursing because my one goal has been to not get reviews that complain about the cussing because I
Yeah.
cannot write Marsh. That's the other part where a little bit of me shines in Marsh because I cuss like a sailor and so does he. So yeah, fuck, it's so versatile.
What sound or noise do you love?
Ooh, bacon frying in a pan, um,
Oh,
or any meat
goddamn!
sizzling, meat
Goddamn it!
sizzling.
If we're not related in some way somehow,
Any kind of meat sizzling, just like a steak in a skillet, or we got some sausage going in the air fryer. I mean, you name it,
oh
like
yeah.
anything like that. I am.
Oh,
That's it's shocking that I'm a portly lad. But that is my happy sounds, unfortunately.
nice. So, what sound or noise do you dislike?
I want to be very clear that I love my mother. Growing up at breakfast, um, every morning she would pour herself a glass of Diet Coke, and there'd be ice in the glass, and it was a glass, and every morning she would sit there at the counter. She had just fed us breakfast. Um, Amazing woman, saint, and she would shake her glass and
Oh,
the ice tinkling against that glass. Um I could have killed her with a smile on my face, for years worth of breakfasts every. And you can't say the woman just fed me an amazing breakfast. I can't say shit. But oh god, and to this day that sound is nails on chalkboard. And it's something about the acoustics. It's like someone like a
Uh,
whiskey tumbler. It doesn't bother me,
mhm.
but like a tall glass, something about like the acoustics on a tall glass. No, no, cannot stand that sound. Oof.
What character of yours would you put their face would put their face on currency of their world?
Oh God. Uh, I think I could see Marsh doing it in a fit of like drug fueled ego. Um, uh, but
Maybe have a fever dream where he's on the
Ye
$100 bill or something.
yeah, yeah, but, I think most of the people in the Jubal County saga, they kinda know their place. They know their place in the world, and they know that is not in any kind of position where you would get your face put on on money.
Nice. All right, what artistry that you haven't done would you love to try to do?
Um, Photography.
Hmm.
I've dabbled in most everything. I grew up taking art lessons, piano lessons. I write, obviously. I've made a bunch of shitty, terrible short films. I do a little bit of graphic design. Like photography is kind of the one like main one that I've never done.
Mm.
Which at this day and age is probably the easiest to get into.
Yeah.
um so but it's like I've realized I don't have the time to like, because yes, it's the barrier to entry is lower now than ever. Does not mean it's easy. It just means it's
Mm.
easy to get into. It's not easy to be good at, and I don't have the bandwidth to, maybe one day when I'm uh the Marsh series has been canceled after 2 seasons on Netflix, and I'm riding the cult fandom circuit into retirement. I'll pick it up then, but for now it's that is not the hobby for me, unfortunately.
What artistry will you never do?
At this point in my life, singing.
Mm.
um I sing all the time in the car. But I was actually in honor choir until puberty, and I singing ain't for me. That ain't it. Anything else I've done, I could see me revisiting at some point where I had free time. I mean, what even is that?
Yeah.
But singing, no, I would never revisit that.
If heaven or whatever beyond you believe in exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
Probably some form of, dude, no one remembers that you did that dumb thing. That, like, all the angsty things that I lay awake in bed at night, I think, oh my god, that was so cringy. I can't believe I did that. Like just having the confirmation that everyone forgot that. And but like, I guess jokes aside, is like, what I really like to hear is this is some, as I'm getting older and fatter, I think about a lot. Um, I think about, like, I actually did a blog about this not long ago. My dad passed away 6 7 years ago now, and he has a little bit of a legacy among people that knew them, that he was a good man, that
Mhm.
kind of deal. But he had really been working towards building this collection of antique tools, and it's really one of those things that it should have, if things had played out differently, it's the kind of thing that should have been like put, turned into a museum, essentially,
Mm.
and something that could have carried on, because he really put in an incredible amount of work into this, decades of work into collecting the antique tools. And I know that if he had not passed so suddenly, it I feel like he would have positioned himself over time to leave that as a legacy. So
Mm.
just the core legacy that I want to leave is that the people that knew me were like, yeah, he was a good dude. Um, but it would really mean the world to me to know, like, God or whoever was like, 100 years from now, someone's still gonna be cracking open, bringing home the rain. Like that would be the bee's knees. So,
Well, Bob, you are a good dude. You're an incredible dude. You're an incredible artist. Writing, you've written some amazing work here, and it's been an absolute honor to sit here and talk to you for an hour about it. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for being here and doing this, and tell everybody where they can hopefully dive into the world of Jubal County and Howard Marsh and Southern Saudade and find these wonderful books and yourself.
Talesbybob.com is my website. It's got links to all my stuff on there. Most social medias you can find me at Tales by Bob, but I'm really only active on Instagram and Facebook. The rest will just direct you there. But I love to talk to folks. I got a contact form on my website. You know, if you're an author on the come up and you have any questions about how I do what I do, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm also huge on transparency. I have a whole section on my website where I break down what book launches look like for me, my monthly sales, things like that. And if that is something that you think you would gain value from, please come check it all out, and you can ask me any questions you'd like about that.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. This was a fun little doubleheader that we did here today. Thanks to Wayne, thanks to Bob, thanks to everybody for watching. Thanks for all the comments and everything. We really appreciate it. And remember that it's always time to go indie now. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.